Strange Destinations, the show where innovators share the tales of the accidents, the inspirations and the connections which led them to create their own unique paths. I'm your host, Dan O'Grady, co-founder of Simpatico, and this show is brought to you by Silicon Beach Radio. Now a quick word from our sponsors.
Silicon Beach Radio, proudly sponsored by Allied Legal, legal advisors to innovative businesses. MYOB, business software that sets you up for success. Victory Offices, flexible workspace solutions, premium serviced offices, co-working, lounge space, virtual office and meeting spaces.
Welcome to Strange Destinations. My guest this week is Paul Barron. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hi, Dan. Good to talk to you.
Likewise. So, for the people out there, Paul, how do you describe your range of skills, abilities, and the things that you do?
Well, Dan, I've described myself as, I guess, an advisor and angel investor, amongst other things. I do a range of consulting work. My wife and I joke about my portfolio career, really. I spent quite a long time earlier in my career working in government and corporate environments, but these days I'm doing lots of little bits everywhere in a range of different spaces. Yeah.
And what was the thing that caused the change from a government corporate career to a bits and pieces career?
I guess when I started out my career, I focused on the things that I was interested in my life, like most people. I studied economics because I wanted to know how the world went together, but it was pretty general degree that included computer science. It was actually a fair bit of art and even a bit of biochemistry. And when I started my career, it was with a small consulting firm doing lots of bits and pieces of everything, which is a great grounding. I worked for BP for 5 years in a corporate environment after that, and they trained me sort of in a technical level on a whole range of different spaces, and really kind of sort of set me up to understand what a corporate environment looked like. But when I'd been working in that environment for, I suppose, 5 years or so, I took some time out, went to Italy, did a bit of sculpture, as you do. And cut a long story short, not long after that, I started my own startup. It was a digital publishing startup. And it was a website really advertising jobs for IT contractors. And it cost me about the same amount as, I guess, an MBA might today, and took about the same length of time. Wow. And ultimately, it was a commercial failure. But really, it was probably a personal success in terms of setting me up for a career in the web and online marketing and in digital.
So in terms of the learning outcomes, for want of a better term, you achieved what an MBA would have given you, you think?
I think so. Look, even these days, if people are considering MBAs, it's kind of a bit of a tough gig. I mean, whereabouts are you heading? Are you heading to be someone inside a corporate machine, kind of, or are you trying to make your own way? And I'm sure people that are studying MBAs have both, many of them have equal intentions, but probably more the big machine option.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if you want to make your own way, the starting a startup teaches you a lot anyway. It certainly taught me a lot, and it was a good way to go.
And was pursuing a startup potentially kind of also an artistic outlet for you in a way, as opposed to being part of a machine, a way to create something and fashion something of your own rather than slot into a pre-existing structure?
I think it's possible to be creative in corporate environments and certainly out on your own. It was more the matter of trying to make something that was my own. I came from a pretty diverse background. My grandfather had his own sort of transport business that he sort of started up from 3 trucks. But his family came from a kind of a history of having factories in Yorkshire and things like that along hard road. That actually for them crashed in the Depression. But so there's something of on one side of my family, a desire, an entrepreneurial desire to create something like that. Whereas on the other side of my family, it's sort of more of my father's a psychiatrist, my mum was an Olympic skier. They're kind of diverse, pretty diverse.
Right.
So often when you're sort of figuring out what you're going to do in your life and who you're going to be, it's sort of a mix of all of those things. But I always had a desire to perhaps prove myself to some degree to my grandfather and others that I could create something and be the author of my own destiny to a degree. Sometimes when you're in a corporate environment, it's like being in a race where you're set the destination and the objectives and what you're trying to do, and the gun goes off and you go for that and you run within those tracks, and those are set for you, and that has its own kind of easy way of being. You know what you're up for, you know what you're trying to do, everything's straightforward. When you're creating your own thing, it's a little more open-ended, and certainly it's a journey of ups and downs and requires quite a different mindset and set of challenges. And setting your own race is pretty hard sometimes. But certainly it's hard for me. But so I'm kind of back into it now after sort of a whole lot of time in corporate environments where I was certainly aligned what I was doing. I was aligned to the objectives of the organisations I worked for and enjoyed that. It's different when you try and set your own objectives, I guess, and try and make them happen.
And growing up in a diverse background where you've got a bit, an entrepreneurial thread going through there from your grandfather, then I guess an academic and sports background as well. How did that shape your outlook when you were young?
It reminds me a bit of my son at the moment. I couldn't wait to start. Look, my parents were divorced. I was with my mum. We were living in a country town. We didn't have a heap of money. I was very keen to start earning my own money, so I had my own paper round at, I think about age 10, 11, around that time for a few years. And my son's just the same. He wants to be frigging out there earning money, working in sort of the supermarket or just being the author of his own destiny. And so from an early age, I was doing that kind of stuff. I wasn't so much into starting my own business, but certainly, earning money and having that power over my life and the power over choices that I wanted to do. So there was that. I think I always wanted to go to university, my father's academic background. And in fact, I didn't know quite what I wanted to do when I went to university at first. I felt like I was like my dad, and so maybe I should be a doctor. So I did a medical intermediate. Then I worked after I completed the medical intermediate while I was waiting for the results, I worked for summer in the hospital and didn't really like it, actually.
Okay.
I was kind of relieved when I didn't actually make it in to med school. That meant I didn't have to turn it down, which I think would have been pretty hard.
Right. That was a blessing.
And I ended up saying, well, what the heck am I going to study? Because I don't really know what the destination looks like. So I just studied, as I mentioned earlier, I picked subjects I was interested in, some of which I'd never studied before, and I enjoyed that. And actually the following summer I got a job in the Department of Trade and Industry because I wanted to better understand how the world worked in a commercial sense, and that was fantastic. And I felt I was a bit more on the right track. And my next summer job actually was, I worked for Treasury in Wellington in the research area there. So and in fact my jobs were bizarre, actually, now I think about it. One thing was trying to work out what to ensure. It was two crazy things. What to ensure things like roads were across New Zealand if there was a natural disaster. Another one was the impact of tariffs across the different income groups. So at that time, there was a lot of debate over tariffs versus other types of import controls. So there was import licensing going on as well as, should we be putting tariffs on? So this was in the days when they were trying to protect car industries, I suppose, in New Zealand. Mind you, the car we didn't have much of one, but
it's not something you kind of would have kind of just been well prepared to step in and go, yep, I know how to calculate and project these kind of problems.
Yeah, look, it was interesting. I was quite good at economics at that time and fascinated by these problems. And when you go and work at a place like Treasury and you're a student, they just throw dumb things at you to look at. They wouldn't pay normal people to do. And it was great fun, though. It was great fun, and I learned a lot. But I also felt that I wasn't going to become an economist either. So that was kind of an interesting direction. And look, when I finished my degree, I felt like, particularly in New Zealand, that I was either going to end up back in Wellington as a public servant, or I don't know, I didn't particularly want to go to Auckland. So that's when I headed to Melbourne. And I was fortunate to have family here to warm me up to the place in the beginning.
Yeah. And was it much of a transition moving from Wellington to Melbourne at that stage? Was it?
More of a socially challenging transition for me. I'm a pretty gregarious guy, and the small consulting company was my first job. It's pretty small, and there was only perhaps one other person my age, and it just took me a while to warm up. I think often people come into Melbourne, particularly at that time, it's a bit more of an insular place than it is these days, and a lot of people in Melbourne in those days, it was sort of who you went to school with and who you grew up with, and people were pretty happy with the friends they had and all of that stuff. So you tended to meet a lot of people who were from outside Melbourne and Australia, and it took a long time to build a network. I think it's different now. I think it's much more of a meritocracy here in Melbourne. It's a very much more outward-looking global community.
Yeah.
Just when I started out, it was hard.
And it's interesting you're kind of talking about that now. At that stage, networks were quite closed, and as you've mentioned, now being working in strategy as an advisor in investment, primarily what you do is developing and growing and cultivating and tapping into various networks. How do you see the way that networks operate and grow these days, particularly in the kind of Melbourne business ecosystem?
Yeah, so when I arrived in Melbourne, which was December 87, this is networking before the internet, really. So if you can imagine, a young graduate floating around, working for companies. I worked a lot in regional Victoria, and certainly I met plenty of people. Networking was really restricted to the people you engage with in work, and if you're lucky, there was some drinks around the place, but it was pretty hard compared to now. I mean, now I think networking in Melbourne, just being part of things like Silicon Beach, being part of co-working centres, of course, didn't exist. So the thought of meeting people in that space. So when I started my own internet startup, which must have been 95-ish, 95, 96. So the web had started, and there were bulletin boards, and there were certainly discussions. A lot of the focus then were more on technical, how we're building websites. There was surprisingly, commercializing the web at that time was pretty much of a dirty word. People were pretty jacked off if you had ads around. Right. There was some purity about the web, and there was almost a religious sort of protective, zealots around not really trying to make it too commercial, because it was very academic in its background. There's a sense that it was going to come. Commercializations were coming, but
And with the portfolio of roles that you've now created for yourself, it sounds like networking is integral to growing relationships and connections and cultivating them for other people as well.
I couldn't agree more. Look, one of the things that, and if we can talk a little bit about angel investment, I think one of the things, certainly for Melbourne Angels, which I'm a member of, that Melbourne Angels, about 80 people who have been around for over 10 years, one of the most active angel investment groups in the country. But one of the things we've really noticed, I think, is that we need to build up our networks across the startup community much better than we have in the past. if you're in the investment community, you're very much inclined to sit back, let everybody come to you. You know, you're in this sort of position of strength because, you know, he who has the gold makes the rules. And I don't subscribe to that model. And look, I think the good investors, if you like, they are on the journey with the founder. There's an equality in that relationship. But if you've been an investor for a while, like many of our Melbourne Angels have, you sort of get some distance from that. And sometimes you've got to have some distance because emotionally, the hardest thing for me is saying no to a founder who I like. It just doesn't add up. And it really puts you through the emotional ringer, I can tell you that. Yeah. You know, and I'm not alone. And so there's an inclination amongst investors to get a bit of distance away. So where I like to focus on really is the very early stage, meeting the people, meeting the potential founders, meeting the people that we might want to invest in, and taking them on that journey so when they hit the investment process, they can put their best foot forward, but also haven't necessarily had to pay a lot of people to get that information. They hadn't have to go through a whole bunch of accelerators necessarily because it's not that complicated in my view. And not only that, they hopefully know a bunch of us because most times, most of the angels I know of will happily spend hours and hours with the founders who maybe they're not even going to invest in, just to help them along the way because that's why they're doing it. They're not doing it to make money. Anyway, so getting back to your sort of networking thing, one of the things that I'm trying to build right now is an angel and residence program across co-working spaces to see if that might work.
Okay.
You know,
or is it a kind of an open advisory service, want a better term?
Yeah, it's funny, you know, it's not something that I feel comfortable charging people for. You know what I mean? It's not why you do it. And there's often, I was meeting an investor the other day who's done this for a few years and said, Paul, you know, you sort of burn out when you just give things for free all the time. I mean, it doesn't, eventually you run out of, you're cynical, I guess. But I don't know, there's a balance there anyway. There's a balance. Anyway, so I've drifted from networking, but anyway, I think that certainly it plays a big part, not only in my investment, but certainly in my my paid work, which so I do advisory work. Certainly, I'm working at the moment with a joint venture which is put together by Ed Peter from Private Media and Darryl Wade, who's one of the founders of Intrepid Travel. You know, I guess that engagement has happened purely through networks and their knowledge of my background. I didn't know either of them before this venture started, but we were introduced. And over, I got to say, a long period, we got to know each other, and now I'm doing some work with them a couple of days a week. So we'll see how that plays out. A lot of the work I've done is through my networks and the people I know and the people who know me.
And I noticed at the kind of towards the bottom of your LinkedIn profile, I guess there's another voluntary interest network that you've become involved in. If you'd like to share with everyone about that and how that came about briefly.
Yeah, well, look, yes, I've joined the Badger Creek CFA, and I've joined, I guess, 4 or 5 months ago now. That was after a fire which occurred and a holiday. It wasn't in the house, thankfully, but just a bit of a misadventure that occurred. And lots of people, men and women from the Badger Creek CFA came and put out a fire at our place. And they said, "Oh, why did you join?" I thought, you know, that's something I always wanted to do. But maybe either a bit old or a bit unfit. I looked at those guys and they weren't young, or they weren't particularly fit or having fun. So yeah, look, I'm now a member at the Badger Creek CFA, and in actual fact, I was facing fires recently, just a burn off, and it's really great working with a bunch of local people from all walks of life, you know, dealing with some pretty visceral stuff, and I've found it thrilling. You know, I've learned so many things. How to operate pumps, how to roll hoses, you know, it's great fun. And it's firefighting. I don't know, my family tend to be a bit worried about it, but when you sort of get into it, it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels exciting. And
it sounds like kind of in the kind of startup investment world, you've been putting up figurative fires for years, so now you're working with literal fires.
Yeah, in my work, I would love putting out figurative fires all the time. For somebody, I was, in the corporate environment, I often thought of myself as a problem solver. I love solving tough problems and creative solutions.
Yeah.
And I suppose this is a little bit like that. So you're right.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, it's all good.
Excellent. Well, look, it's been great to chat with you. And if people want to connect with you in some way, what's the best way for people out there to get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, look, LinkedIn's great. I'm a big LinkedIn fan. Please, though, just don't connect to me randomly. Send me a message with a connection to say
of course
what and why, and because otherwise I'll just think you're just another notch on your LinkedIn belt. So LinkedIn's great, but any sort of social media is pretty good too.
Great.
Yeah.
Right. Well, great to catch up, Paul. All the best with the firefighting on all levels.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
To everyone out there, thanks for listening to Strange Destinations. I'm Dan O'Grady, and the show's brought to you by Silicon Beach Radio and Simpatico. Cheers.